U.S. President Donald Trump is warning trade partners not to back away from U.S. deals, declaring a much higher tariff on countries that try to walk back from recently negotiated trade agreements. Now, his warning comes after the U.S. Supreme Court struck down his emergency tariffs. Take a look.
U.S. President Donald Trump on Monday warned countries against backing away from recently negotiated trade deals with the U.S. This follows the Supreme Court decision Friday to strike down his emergency tariffs. Trump said he would hit them with much higher duties under different trade laws. On social media, he said, quote, "Any country that wants to play games with the ridiculous Supreme Court decision, especially those that have ripped off the USA for years and even decades, will be met with a much higher tariff and worse than that which they just recently agreed to. Buyer beware." Trump said he also may impose license fees on trading partners as uncertainty over his next tariff moves gripped the global economy and sent stocks lower. A spokesperson for the U.S. Trade Representative's office did not immediately respond to a request for further comment on Trump's plans. In Brussels, the European Parliament decided on Monday to postpone a vote on the European Union's trade deal with the U.S. after Trump imposed a new temporary import duty of 15% on imports from all countries.
They don't know what would be the terms of the deal now.
Nicolas Frederic Poitiers, a research fellow at the Bruegel think tank, says there is a high level of uncertainty in Europe over how this will play out.
It is unclear what will be the rules under this new tariff, so this has to be calculated good by good. It is not unlikely that there will be goods where the tariff rate will be somewhat higher than under the agreement of last year. At the same time, it is not clear if these tariffs will stand for very long anyway. So right now, there's a lot of uncertainty over this.
Trump's new duty is set to take effect early Tuesday morning. At that same moment, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency said it would stop collecting the duties ruled illegal by the Supreme Court's decision.
Staying on trade with the U.S. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman says it is too early to assess the impact of fresh U.S. tariff changes as India's Commerce Ministry reviews the situation and weighs the next steps in trade negotiations with Washington. Her remarks come just days after U.S. President Donald Trump imposed a 10% tariff on imports from all countries for 150 days starting today, later raising the rate to 15%.
On the Indian economy, I think it's a bit too soon for me to comment. But on the trade, particularly, aside from the Indian economy in general, the Commerce Ministry is reviewing the situation. The delegation will have to take a call on when they're going to go for further negotiations. So it's a bit too early for me to comment.
Meanwhile, the European Union is demanding United States to honor last year's EU-U.S. trade deal following the recent Supreme Court ruling against President Trump's tariffs and his move to impose fresh 15% global levies. The EU says its agreed tariff ceilings must be respected.
A deal is a deal, the European Commission said in a statement on Sunday, demanding that the US stick to the terms of a trade deal reached last year. This came after the US Supreme Court struck down Donald Trump's global tariffs on Friday.
Actually not in a good mood.
And he responded with new 10% tariffs and then increased them to 15% across the board. The Commission, which negotiates trade policy on behalf of 27 EU member states, said Washington must provide full clarity on the steps it intends to take. Last year's EU-U.S. trade deal set a 15% US tariff rate for most EU goods, apart from those covered by other sectoral tariffs such as on steel. It also allowed zero tariffs on some products such as aircraft and spare parts, while the EU agreed to remove import duties on many US goods. But it is not clear whether Trump's new 15% tariffs supersede the deal. If they do, the EU's zero tariff exemptions could disappear, and the comparative advantage the EU had with a 15% tariff would appear to have disappeared, as even countries without a deal face the same rate. As uncertainty looms, gold prices climbed to a 3-week high on Monday, and Wall Street futures and the US dollar slid.
And FedEx is suing the U.S. government over tariffs. That's right. The global logistics and e-commerce giant has filed a lawsuit seeking a refund of emergency tariffs imposed by President Donald Trump. The move follows the Supreme Court ruling that deemed that President Trump overstepped his authority by using the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, a sanctions law, to impose tariffs on imported goods. Now, more than $175 billion in tariff collections could potentially be subject to refunds.